You are listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. I'm Kyle Bryant.
And I'm Sean Baumsart. Together, we're navigating life with disability. All right. Hey, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. I'm Sean, and you are listening to episode 25. On the other end of the line, we have Kyle. What's going on, man? How are you?
What's up? It's good to be here and enjoying my weekend, and just glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, glad to hear it. We are super excited to have a special guest on the show today. Kyle, in fact, you've got a little bit of history with this guy, so I'll let you set it up for us.
Yeah, so I met Drew Dudley when we were both speaking at a University of Central Florida Leadership Week. It was a multi-day gig for Drew, and so we got to actually go out and go to coffee, and I listened to him talk. So the other day when I was preparing for this episode, I searched Drew Dudley on Google, and this is what came up. It says, Drew Dudley is a leadership educator. He believes leadership is not a characteristic reserved for the extraordinary. He works to help people discover the leader within themselves. And I think that's just an amazing mission statement. And we are really glad to have Drew Dudley on the podcast today. So, Drew Dudley, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, to both of you.
So, I think this description of you that I found online, you type into Google and there's that, first thing that comes up and it's in a box at the top of the page, right? And it looks like this description comes from TED. But do you think that's pretty accurate? You work to help people discover the leader within themselves?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is they say that leadership is not something reserved for the extraordinary. And I didn't write that. I think it is from TED. And my argument in many ways is that's partly right, but I also think that it gives the idea that those of us who, that somehow demonstrating leadership can be ordinary. And for me, it's leadership isn't something reserved for the extraordinary, because I think all of us have moments of extraordinary impact within us. And so that's the only sort of quibble I have. Leadership isn't something reserved for the extraordinary. I'm like, well, anytime that you do demonstrate a moment of leadership, which I define as a moment of interpersonal impact, a moment where somebody walks away from you feeling better off for having interacted with you, those are extraordinary moments. And so leadership isn't reserved for the extraordinary. Leadership is creating those extraordinary. And don't forget, extraordinary doesn't mean absolutely mind-blowing. It doesn't mean something you've never seen before. Extraordinary means something different than what always happens. And I think, for me, leadership is consciously making sure that you are engaging in being aware of what you're doing every day, creating plans to act in a way that's consistent with who you want to be every day, because I think a large percentage of what any of us do every single day is in many ways unconscious.
And one of the phrases I hear often, and I say it a lot too, is using that word intentional. It's being intentional throughout your day. It's being intentional with those obligations you talked about, or the promises, or the commitment to be a better person, or whatever it may be. It's not just doing the habit or the routine because that's what you're used to doing for the last 5, 10, 20 years. It's being intentional about who you want to become and taking the steps to actually be that person and have that kind of influence.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is the very idea of becoming this type of person. And I love that idea that you want to continually improve, right? But I also think we have to bear in mind that sometimes when we say things like become the person you want to be, or we want to do leadership training. It's the same sort of idea when we say, oh, we're doing training, or we're trying to become the leaders of tomorrow, which a lot of universities and colleges say, or, we want to become what we want to be. Inherent in that is the idea that you're not yet something to be proud of, or you're not yet as good as you could be. And I recognize that is the case. We always want to strive for continuous improvement. But I think a big part of the work that I do in terms of leadership development is we want to start with the assumption that leadership is already present, that we are, in fact, already engaging in really powerful leadership behaviors. One, we're probably not conscious of them. And two, because we're not conscious of them, we're not planning for them effectively. So, yeah, I agree with you in that we always want to be better and we want to be intentional. But I think we want to be intentional about getting even better as opposed to becoming something. I think we have to start with the assumption that we're already there, that we are already leaders. We're not probably as good as we can be because a lot of the leadership we're demonstrating is unintentional. It simply is a result of our unconscious behaviors, and because most of us are good people, our unconscious behaviors are usually pretty positive. My argument is that there's another more intentional gear we can get to that makes it more likely we'll create these more conscious and intentional moments for sure.
Well, and I feel like, so you have a video online that you did for TED, and the point of that video is to recognize the leadership in all of us, right? And so you're saying that everyone's got leadership, and the key is to recognize that, right? And just to be conscious of it, that we're all being leaders all the time.
Yeah, or we can choose to be leaders all the time. Right. I think it really is a big part. Everyday leadership is the idea that the best leaders focus on this everyday leadership. We focus a lot when we assess ourselves as leaders and as human beings, really, on extraordinary days in our lives, days where things happen that don't usually happen, right? So we get promoted, or we accomplish some major athletic feat that we've been training for, or we get something that we've worked really hard for. And those are extraordinary days. They're days that things happen that don't usually happen. And those are good extraordinary. I just rhymed off. But there's also negative extraordinary. There's days where we don't get something we think we deserve. There's days where we fail at something we've worked hard at. And there are days where we hurt people that we care about, or are hurt by people we care about. And I don't doubt that on those extraordinary days, we can learn a lot about ourselves and about each other. But it really is in the ordinary days where long-term success and failure is fostered. It's in the ordinary days where our true selves get unveiled. How you behave on 95% of your days is a much better indicator of who you really are than how you behave in these 5%. And yet we judge our careers and our lives and our relationships mostly based on these much more exciting, it seems, extraordinary days. And my argument is that there is a form of leadership to which we all can and should aspire. And that is by identifying what we want to stand for every day and making sure we create a plan to do it. And my argument is if you create a plan to identify the things that you stand for, what kind of values you want to put out into the world, and then you execute that plan every day, so that if you say you want to be a person who stands for respect or compassion or generosity, and I challenge anyone listening to this right now to say, here are the values I want to stand for. If people are talking about me in a room I'm not in, what words do I want them to use to describe me? And then whatever those words are, respect or honesty or whatever it might be, like give me an example of how you've lived up to it today. Can you give me like one specific act that you've done today that demonstrates that value? And my argument is, if you create a plan to make sure that you can give me a positive answer to that every day, then I argue that you are demonstrating leadership. And it's not about how many people you're in charge of or what your title is. It's about whether or not you are providing evidence to yourself and to other people that the things you claim to stand for, you are actually doing. And that takes intentionality, it takes consciousness, and it takes an actual plan. And I think we hope to live up to the things that we claim to stand for. I don't think we plan to do it. And my work really focuses around the idea that leadership comes from, one, identifying the values you want to stand for, and two, creating and executing a plan to actually do that. Because most of us let a lot of days go by where all we focus on is what we have to get done, rather than whether we're giving ourselves evidence that we are the person that we want to be. And I think you can do both. I think that you can live up to your values while meeting all of your obligations. I think that we sacrifice living up to our values in the name of living up to our obligations sometimes. And I think that being aware of that and creating a plan to be more effective at finding a way to do both at the same time, that's what I think leadership is.
Wow, man, that's super powerful and applicable to every single person. Everyone can do that, and live the principles that you talk about. I want to give the listeners a little perspective, a little background on who you are. We kind of jumped right into it because that's, because Sean and I have watched so many of your videos. And I got to hang out with you once, and so, we know you and we know your background a little bit. But for the listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up?
Well, I am Canadian. I grew up about an hour and a half outside of Toronto, Canada, and headed out to the east coast of Canada for university for my undergrad. And went to a tiny little liberal arts college, 2,200 people, dove into the life there. My whole identity growing up had been about how well I did academically. You come out of high school with a 99 or whatever I had average, and all of your sort of pride and rewards and pats on the back came from older people because you lived up to these standards they set to say, figure out what the person at the front of the room wants and deliver it to them. We'll give you grades. We'll give you awards. And the world sort of pats you on the back and says you're doing it right. And that was my whole life going into university. And when I got to university, I discovered that you had the opportunity to work with people to actually accomplish real things. A lot of it was fundraising. A lot of it was bringing people together to raise money to fight. In many cases, it was cystic fibrosis. We created a charity in memory of a friend of ours we lost to cancer. We did a lot of work on a scholarship fund in order to memorialize a roommate of ours who passed away in a car accident. And all of a sudden, this stuff that I was doing seemed to not be theorizing about the world or writing papers about what the world might be or what's happened already in the world. It was about actively changing things for real people around us, whether it was the people who were working together to raise the money because we felt incredibly empowered by doing so, or the individuals who were receiving the money and gaining the more resources as a result of our work. And so all of a sudden I started to realize that I didn't want to comment on the world for the rest of my life in academia. I actually wanted to engage in it. And one of the charities we had engaged with, I eventually became the national chair. It was Canada's largest fundraiser for college and university students. I ended up in that process creating a lot of presentations that were aimed at empowering youth on how to plan events effectively, how to acquire sponsorship, how to market. I became the head of a number of different organizations because of that skill set. Eventually was hired to run the leadership development program at Canada's biggest university, the University of Toronto, where I spent close to a decade. And my work there started to become more and more in demand. I was asked to speak and I was asked to guest lecture. And eventually I left the university to do leadership development consulting full time. So organizations who are looking to create leadership programs, who are looking to increase their leadership capacity of their people, they hire me to come in and share the process and the work that I do about personal value clarity and how to embed them in your daily behaviors. So really, I started a consulting firm that now works with a lot of Fortune 500 companies that help people understand what their values are and change their behavior to be more in line with those values without having to completely upend their lives. I started off as somebody who wanted to go be a lawyer and get straight A's, and became somebody who wanted to build teams, bring people together, and do good things. And now I try to empower other organizations to change behaviors in a way that makes that possible for even more people.
Tell us a little bit, because I know a big part of what you do, I'm assuming, is just keynote speeches, and I know that sort of came out of the success of your TED Talk, right? So tell us about that.
Well, the interesting thing was in 2010, one of my students sent me my first ever TED Talk. It was Ken Robinson's "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And I was flattened by it. I just thought it was, and I think that talk taught me something that has really driven a lot of the work that I do, which is the most powerful thing you can do for another human being isn't to make them say, "Oh my God, I didn't know that." One of the most powerful things you can do for another person is to make them say, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one who felt that, or was scared of that, or who needed that." And so it was so empowering to watch this video of Ken Robinson. And if you haven't watched it, anyone listening, go and watch it. And say to myself, I thought I was the only one who felt that way. I thought I was the only one embedded in this big, revered education system who thought it was really failing in some big ways. And it was so empowering. And I started to use that talk. And of course, all of these other TED Talks it led to, because once you like one, you watch a bunch more. And I started to embed them in my leadership program. And one of my students came in one afternoon and said, "There is a TED conference here in Toronto, and you should apply to be a speaker because they have 2 open speaking slots." And I said, "Oh, I'm just a part-time speaker." And the problem was, I had always told my students that you can never use the word "just" to describe who you are or what you do, because when you do it, you're giving people permission to expect less from you. And so he called me on it, and he said, "You can't do that. You won't let us do it." And my students really pushed. They like 43 of them nominated me to be a speaker there, and I got accepted. They gave me 6 minutes, and I remember thinking, I can't introduce myself in 6 minutes, as you folks have probably noticed. And I didn't know what to talk about. And I called up my best friend and said, "What should I share? I only have 6 minutes." And he said, "Share that story that you called a lollipop moment," which is what the TED Talk eventually became about, a 6-minute story. And I remember saying to him, "Look, man, I can't talk about that. Like, this is a TED stage. That story doesn't have enough gravitas." And he just said to me, "Dude, get over yourself." He said, "That's a story that resonates with people, and you're not going to tell it because it doesn't make you sound smart enough. Like, that's not how you go through the world. Like, talk about what works, not what looks good."
Yeah.
And so I went online and I shared this story about one moment in my life where someone walked up to me and explained to me how a single gesture, a single action I had taken had fundamentally altered the course of her life. And what was interesting is that I didn't remember the gesture. And if you had asked me to list all of the things that I thought were most impressive about my life, there's no way I would have talked about this moment that she did. And yet this moment led to her meeting her future husband. And I didn't remember it. And so I shared this little story on stage that I was afraid would come off as too, I don't know, simple, cheesy, motivational speaker-ish. We have been taught that leadership comes from someone who acts and looks a certain way. So we've got this archetype of a leader in our head, right? And they're usually a white dude, able-bodied, standing up on a stage who can speak clearly and slowly and charismatically, and that's what a leader looks like. And so that's where we look for leadership. And we tend not to be open to accepting it from other places. But it was a student half my age who walked into my office and said, "You should try this," who called me out when I said I wasn't going to do it. And then it was another friend of mine who, doesn't have a positional leadership title, who said, "You're making a mistake by not talking about this." Like, leadership comes from these moments, not necessarily from, your title or how much money you make or what cards life dealt you. And so it was that student who's one of the biggest leaders of my life. It was that young woman who came up to me and told me a story who's one of the great leaders of my life. And they don't look like we were taught leaders look like. But what they did is they recognized the leadership around them. And leadership recognized is leadership created. And if we want to create more leadership in ourselves and our organizations and our communities, we should start by recognizing the stuff that already exists. That means recognizing the people who daily engage in activities that make the people around them feel better and act more effectively. And that's where I really talk about what my leadership development is all about, is helping people say, this is my leadership. Now, am I consciously choosing to engage in activities every day that actually show it? And most people aren't. They're doing it by accident. They're being good people. They're just not being as consciously as good as they can be.
I love that. Leadership, what is leadership recognized is leadership created. I'm going to keep that one in my noggin for sure.
Well, it's just a lot of the people who are the best leaders in our lives, they don't think of themselves as such. It's when you walk up to them and say, remember when you did this? Remember when you said this? Remember that moment where I was struggling with this and you created this simple gesture? I want to let you know that was leadership to me. Those people in that moment probably never thought of it as such. But all of a sudden what you've done is you created a moment that nobody saw as leadership and actually shifted the way people perceive it. Yeah. So you haven't created a brand new moment. What you've done is you've reframed the way people see something that already happened. Yeah. And in it, you remind them that if they choose to create more of those moments, then they're going to have even more leadership in their lives. And what you've done is instead of saying you could do this, you're saying you have done this. Do it again. So I think leadership is in many ways recognizing that you are going to react without thinking. You have no control over how you react to things is one thing that I really want to express to leaders. And I think everyone can be a leader and is a leader, and it just needs to be more conscious about it. But you cannot control how you react to things. Reactions are inbred into our DNA. Anger, fear, jealousy, those things have kept us alive for thousands of years, and we have no control over feeling them. We can, however, work on our ability to recognize them quickly, that when we're feeling them, and adapt our behavior to those reactions. We're the only creatures with a gap between stimulus and response, and I think leadership is born in that gap. How you choose to treat the gap between stimulus and response, not stimulus and reaction. And the reason I think that's really important is that there's a lot of focus, I think, sometimes on telling people that they shouldn't feel a certain way, that they need to meditate. And look, meditation's great, don't get me wrong. But I'm like, you need to get yourself to a position where you do not feel fear, where you do not feel anger, where you do not feel jealousy. And that means if you do feel those things, that what it indicates is a lack of will or character. And I want to make clear to anyone listening that when you feel fear and jealousy and anger, don't apologize or feel bad for them, because what you're doing then is apologizing or feeling bad for your humanity. So you aren't a bad person if you feel negative emotions. Where leadership is born is developing yourself to a point where you could very quickly recognize that you're fearful or jealous or angry, and then figure out how you're going to respond to your reactions. I think that's really, really important. And that's that intentionality and that consciousness we were talking about before. But built into that is you have to forgive yourself for feeling these emotions.
So, Drew, you're starting to remind me of when I saw you talk. You did like a Q&A at that dorm room or whatever it was at the University of Central Florida. And I was sitting in the back. I couldn't even see you because there were so many people there. But you were just, I think you had just turned 30. And you had a list of 30 things that you wrote down about leadership. And you were just going off for like an hour. And I was just looking around and minds were just blowing all around me. It was crazy. And, so I remember one of the things you said. I don't know why this one stuck with me, but I just felt like it was a unique work as hard as you can to get the best GPA you can, and then work as hard as you can to make that the least remarkable thing about you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was on the morning of my 38th birthday.
Oh,
I
38.
sat down and wrote,
All right.
yeah, and I sat down and wrote 38 things I've learned in 38 years. Because I used to ask people for what I called their edge of the bed advice, which is, if your if your son or daughter was leaving for school tomorrow morning, leaving your house, going to get married, whatever it might be, and they asked you for one piece of advice about the world, what would you give them? And I started to realize, man, that's asking a lot out of people. Like one single thing. And so I started to realize that you get a lot better answers if you ask people to do, say, 30 of them. And because there's not so much pressure, right? And you can come up with things that are funny. So I wrote down 38 things. And yeah, you're right. What I did is that night I sat down and just went over a bunch of them with people. And I remember I used to give presentations to high schools a long time ago. And I talked about how important it was to focus on who you were rather than how well you met the standards of teachers and professors, right? Because, when we're young, that's what we're taught is this is where the rewards come from. And I talked about how important it was to recognize that you need to be okay with who you are. And you need to have a list of things that you want to live up to. And I talked about how grades should be, obviously a grade should be important, but there's so much more to school than grades. And a principal came up to me after one of them and said, we can't have you coming in here and telling our students that grades aren't important. And I was kind of like, look, I never said that. I never said grades weren't important. I just said they can't be the only thing that's important. And he said, well, it's the teachers, some of the teachers were really upset that's what the students heard, that grades aren't important. It might not have been what you meant, but it's what they heard. So I remember saying to him, no, I'm not saying that grades aren't important. I'm saying they should work incredibly hard to make their grades extraordinary. And then they should work twice as hard to make sure that their grades are the least impressive thing about them. And he looked right at me and he said, then say that. And I thought, fair enough. Okay. And then I remember the first time I said it, everybody's head in the audience went down and wrote it down. Yeah. And I thought, okay, that obviously resonated. And yeah, I've used it constantly because I think it is, if I had to sum up for any young person what their goal out of their educational experience should be, it should be that. Kick ass on your grades because they will open doors for you. But you should work really hard to make that happen. And then twice as hard to make sure they're the least impressive thing about you. Because if you do that, if your grades are amazing and they're the least impressive thing about you, success is going to follow you everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Except we don't teach kids that. We don't teach it. And so it's moments like that where somebody says, I remember you saying this, that makes me think, wow, what an extraordinary ability we have in this world. Obviously that you remember it, but I also want to point out to everyone out there that if you share with the things that you truly believe and you share with people the things that have changed your life for the better, you have no idea what's going to stick in a way that people remember 5 years from now. But too many of us dismiss the things that we know and we've learned because we're just something, we're just starting a career, or I'm just a mom. And we use these words to diminish ourselves. But look, every single one of you listening can say something like that and have somebody, like Kyle, just say, I remember you saying it. We all can do it. And look, I encourage everyone listening to sit down and write down 30 things that they've learned in their lives. It could be anything, and write them down, because it'll be an amazing experience for you to just start to reflect on the amazing wisdom that you have. Because I really think that we don't give ourselves enough credit for our wisdom. Leadership at its core is making one big decision to make a series of consistent, positive, small decisions every day. And we all have that ability.
Before And before you know it, we're actually establishing the habits that you talked about in the beginning that Duke is recognizing as only being 40% of our day.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
today, no drink. Tomorrow, no drink. Next week, no drink. And before you know it, like you have experienced and maybe can attest, it becomes easier and easier and easier over time because that's just the new habit.
Yeah, well, it doesn't even become easier. It becomes instinctual. Like easy versus hard, you
Good
have to
point.
be conscious of whether something is easy or hard. Once it becomes instinctive, it's actually not hard, right? Because you're doing it without having to think, without having to expend extra energy. So the goal isn't to make it easier. The goal is to make it more instinctual, and the goal is to make it a bigger habit. Even though I lost a lot of weight, I wasn't doing a lot of cardio and working out. And I started doing that in January. And I mean, it wasn't even a decision I made. I lost the person I loved passed away suddenly. And because I can't drink and because, I try to eat healthy, my biggest crutches for dealing with difficult situations were gone. I couldn't go out and have a drink, and I couldn't just go and binge on pizza. So I was like, well, I need something to create pleasure, because there's two different types of pleasure: healthy pleasure and unhealthy pleasure. Healthy pleasure is when you engage in that pleasureful activity, it actually is beneficial for you long run. Eating junk food is unhealthy because I love how happy I feel when I'm doing it, and I hate myself after. So I went to the gym that first day. I did some kickboxing, high intensity interval training. My heart rate went up high and stayed that way for the first time in 12 years. And afterwards, once I got past the I'm going to die feeling, I felt amazing, right? Like, oh, wow, this adrenaline and these endorphins. And then I tried to go the next day, and I was so sore, and I was so tired. And I walked in, and this extraordinary woman who's become a really important part of my life, I said, I'm feeling really rough, but it just gets easier, right? And I loved what she said to me. She goes, it doesn't get easier. You just get better at it. And so creating habit, making it instinctive, that's you getting better at it. That's not making it easier. That's you getting better at it.
Love it.
You mentioned your leadership courses. Do you mind talking for a moment about what you offer and what you have going on and what's exciting in the day-to-day process for you and what you offer folks?
Sure. Thanks for the chance to do that. I talked for the last 5 years on stage about a process that I used to help people change their behavior so that they would create more conscious moments of leadership every day. It's one thing to say all of us can engage in leadership if we choose to, which is a nice enough sentiment. But what good am I if I don't talk about here's the process for how? Here's how to make it a habit. And the process is called operationalizing leadership values. And it involves 3 key steps. The first one is identifying what the most important values to you are, and most people cannot. 2, defining what they actually mean. And as I say to anyone listening, like if someone followed you around for 30 days out of your life and saw every single interaction you had, and at the end of those 30 days, I said, what are this person's key values? What values are most important to them? What values would they like their children to pick up from them? What values do they pivot to whenever they have to make a difficult decision? Like what values would you say? And most people cannot tell me. And that means that you're just accidentally living your values every day, if you are at all. So the process that I try to teach, which works whether you're having a good day or a bad day, because any process I teach you that only works when you're having a good day or when you have a lot of time is a crappy process. So how do you identify your core values? How do you surface them without just asking what they are? You actually have to go through a process to figure out what they are. Then how do you define what they mean? Like if you said I stand for respect or honesty or generosity, if I said to you, explain what that means in the simplest English terms possible, most people can't. So how do you do what they are and what they mean? And then there's a third step that allows you to embed those into your life every day. And I lay out the process, but it's a very personalized process. So what I've done is created an online program of about 5 hours that allows people to walk through it and customize the operationalized leadership values approach. It's called Day One Leadership Direct. You can find it at drewdudley.com. So DREWDUDLEY.com. You can go there and try out a free trial, take the first course for free. And if you'd like to do the rest of it, what you can do is I'll give all the podcast listeners here a discount code. They'll get it for half off. Yeah, TWODD pod. So if you want to go try out the trial at drewdudley.com, and you'll get the opportunity to upgrade if you like what you're seeing. It'll walk you through, help you identify your core values and how to live them every day. And it's based on research that shows individuals who have clarity on their personal values are much happier, much more productive, much prouder of who they are and the work that they do. And as such, this is a program that's designed to help you discover the things that are tied directly to happiness, pride, and productivity. So you can go take the free trial, and if you like what you see, when it comes time to actually upgrade to the full program, use the code TWODDPOD, and you'll get half off for anybody that's listening.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Drew. And folks,
my pleasure.
You heard it from Drew himself. He's offering our listeners 50% off his courses that are brand new. So, Drew, we really appreciate your generosity. I think that's amazing. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Kyle and I are both wondering, when are you going to write a book, Drew?
I am very excited to let you know that next fall, I will be releasing my first book, and we'll be doing a lot of promotional touring around that. So that deal has just been confirmed, and so we'll be releasing a book sort of going over my work, and it'll be next fall, and there'll be a lot of public stuff around that.
Wow, that's awesome. Really exciting, because actually one of the questions that I wrote down for the episode was, when are you going to write a book? So there's my answer.
Yeah, it's written, it's being edited, and it comes out. We got Hachette Books, who also publishes Malcolm Gladwell and David Baldacci and a couple of other big ones. They've sort of signed on, so it'll be in wide release. Pick it up at a retailer near you next year.
This has been an absolutely value-packed episode, and we really appreciate you for giving up your time to be with us here today. Thank you, Drew. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Find us online at twodisableddudes.com, and please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts.
We'd like to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Special thanks to our audio producer, Jake Tompkins, who also composed the music.
Until next time, keep living with urgency.